I haven't even started the video yet and I lost my laptop. Leave it outside. Oh yeah, of course I did. Cool. Ooh. Ah, mummies. Mummies, mummies, mummies. If by the end of this video, mummies still sounds like a real word to you, I have not done my job properly. Mummies. We are obsessed with mummies. Our wild imaginations have turned them into everything from shambling video game enemies, to demigods doing battle with Brendan Fraser, to of course, and most importantly, every single one of the members of my favorite funk band. Here come the mummies reference for your notes. There's something that transfixes us about mummies more than the discovery of any skeleton. Maybe it's just morbid curiosity, or maybe it's that we can see a little bit of ourselves in them more than you can with the empty eye sockets of a skull. Their ancient hair and fingernails and frozen laughter lines is both eerie and beautiful, but mummies are a lot more than just pretty faces. They can offer us a wealth of information. In the overwhelming majority of burials, all the little squishy bits have long since disappeared, but not in mummies. Everything from their stomach contents, battle scars, and soft tissues can write a detailed biography of the lives that they once lived. However, there are some mummies that preserve a feature so rare that it has only been recorded at less than 100 sites across the entire world. You already read the title of this video, so you already know what I'm talking about. That is, of course, ancient tattoos. And to do this topic justice, we'll be joined by arguably the preeminent voice in the study of ancient tattoos, none other than Aaron Deter-Wolf, as well as a modern tattoo artist who works to bring these ancient designs back to life and will be putting one of them on me permanently. Howdy friends, my name is Milo Rossi, and today we're going to be taking a deep dive. I guess that's actually quite appropriate. Today we're going to be taking a deep dive into the weird world of ancient mummy tattoos.
What's going on, guys? I'm in your basement. You're probably wondering why I'm down here, but it's because I had something really important I needed to tell you. You know how I'm going on tour from like middle of October to middle of November? Well, some of the locations started to sell out, so we added some new ones. October 28th, we got another show in Boston, and we got 2 new shows in Poughkeepsie, New York on November 2nd and 3rd, and then 1 additional trivia night in Philly on November 6th. And potentially we're looking to add at least 1 more location, but we'll see if we actually do that. So if you want to come see one of my talks or catch a trivia night, well, the tickets are available now, baby. Most locations still have a few tickets available, so it is not too late to get in on it. So go check them out now. Link is in the description, because damn, I gotta leave for this in like 72 hours, so showtime, I guess. Anyway, thanks guys. I'm so excited to see some of you there. It's gonna be a great time. We're gonna have laughs. We got some cool custom tour limited merch. Shake a lot of hands, kiss a lot of babies, whatever the thing you do is when you're doing things. Anyway, go get your tickets for the tour, available now. Thanks again, guys. I'm gonna sneak upstairs and steal food out of your fridge. Bye.
For anyone who has had the experience of getting a tattoo done, I'm sure we're all familiar with the reactions that it gets. Things like, yo, that's pretty sick. Damn, are you sure they spelled that right? Yeah, but you guys have only been together for like 2 weeks. Ooh, yeah, that looks infected to me. But probably the most common response is the classic, you know that's permanent, don't ya? I don't know why I became a Minnesotan mother for that one. Oh, you know, that's permanent there, sweetie, and it's spelled wrong and is also infected. You have any idea how ugly that's gonna look when you're old and wrinkly? I don't give a shit how I'm gonna look when I'm old and wrinkly, because I'm not right now. The whole thing about a tattoo is we view it as being permanent, and that's sort of true. A tattoo is permanent for as long as you are. Since most ancient remains don't preserve skin and flesh, it's really hard to find a lot of evidence of ancient tattoos. This makes the preservation of ancient tattoos one of the most interesting byproducts of mummification, because it gives us a tiny glimpse into artistic expressions and superstitions and medical practices that have otherwise been completely lost to time. A phenomenon that's made all the more interesting when you consider how insanely rare tattoo mummy discoveries actually are. Mummies alone are a pretty rare find, requiring very specific burial and environmental conditions in order to form. Despite this, mummies have been found at thousands of sites across the world, but tattoo mummies make up only a tiny fraction of those discovered. Now, I can't say with confidence exactly how many sites have been found to have tattooed mummies, because some are unpublished, some are still being researched, but we have a pretty good estimate. Let's have a look at the Tattooed Human Mummies database. Yes, of course that's a thing. It's the internet, okay? Did you really think that someone wasn't going to create the Tattooed Mummies database? I'll leave a link to this site in the description of this video because it has a really nice interactive map that I recommend you check out. And this shows pretty close to all of the sites where tattooed mummies have been discovered. And if we count them all up, we get to a grand total of 60 sites. Some of these sites might have had more than one mummy. Now, either way, this may sound like kind of a lot. 60 is a large number, but when you consider that there have been tens of thousands of archaeological sites excavated across the world, you realize that this is actually astronomically small. So rare, in fact, that it makes the discovery of a tattooed mummy at an archaeological site more rare than finding gold or gemstones. Now, if you have a look at this map, you may notice that there is a pattern here, and that is that these 60 sites are not evenly spread across the world. You can pretty quickly see that most of the sites are concentrated in 3 places. Those are the Peruvian coast, the Nile River, and the Central Eurasian steppe. So this could lead to a pretty reasonable question. Were these the only parts of the world where ancient people practiced tattooing? I'd be willing to wager almost certainly not. Some of you quick thinkers out there may have noticed the other pattern with these 3 locations, and that is that they just happen to be 3 of the best locations in the entire world for the preservation of mummies. The dry windswept coast of the Andes, the hot and also dry Egyptian desert, and the very cold and still dry Eurasian steppe. And that there were undoubtedly many other cultures throughout the world that practiced tattooing, but simply were not in an environment where their bodies could be preserved for us to have evidence of it. We can support this theory a little bit by looking at some of the outlier mummies on this map. There's a couple sites in the Philippines. They have almost full body tattoos of geometric shapes and animals like centipedes and scorpions, and were preserved due to their burial inside of hollow logs. In Greenland, there's been several mummies found at a Paleo-Inuit site who have tattoo lines along their faces, and have been preserved due to the harsh, cold climate. And of course, there is a single site in Europe. Found buried in the snow in a remote mountain pass, this outlier has the oldest tattoos ever discovered, none other than my boy, Otzi the Iceman. For those of you that are newer to this channel, welcome, firstly. But a little fun fact about me, Otzi is probably my favorite archaeological discovery of all time, and the find that got me interested in archaeology when I was a kid. He died 5,300 years ago after being shot in the back with an arrow in the Tyrolean Alps. And the freezing temperatures preserved his body, which bears 61 different tattoos. A few years back, as an homage to how important this discovery is to me, I got all of Otzi's tattoos put on me, myself. And like a lot of people say about tattoos, once you get that first one, you're addicted to it. And I can tell you that that is absolutely true, because after this, I went down a deep, deep rabbit hole of ancient tattoo traditions. Not long after, I stumbled across these, the Pazyryk warrior mummies. You're probably familiar with them. They're absolutely nuts. They have these crazy tattoos all over their body of these, like, animals with horns made out of, like, leaves and things like that. And from the moment I saw them, I thought 2 things. That is the coolest thing I've ever seen, and I need it on my body right now. And I should really make a video on ancient tattoos. And so we're gonna be doing both of those things today. So before we dive into the strange world of ancient mummies, let me introduce you to our tattoo artist. Ladies and gentlemen, I dragged his ass all the way here from Los Angeles. Give it up for Mo. This is Mo. He's a tattoo artist based out of Los Angeles, California, who specializes in stick and poke or hand-poked tattoos. Much of his work is inspired by ancient art, with pieces covering everything from cave paintings to rock art to reproductions of actual ancient tattoos. Mo is also a good friend of mine, and him and I actually met on the tour that I did to Turkey a few years ago. All that's to say, he is the perfect guy for this job. Schminky, oh my god, I'll get her. She doesn't quite get it.
No.
And by it, mean literally fucking anything at all.
That's okay.
All right, here we go.
All right. Wiggle out. Stand up as naturally as possible. Thank you.
I think that lion might be a little close. Do you
Yeah.
also see that?
Yeah,
Like him,
that's what I was thinking.
him
yeah.
head. Ah, what a concept. Yeah.
That really does
it's
it.
not just a fashion statement. Oh?
So don't be too close again.
Okay, I believe in you, Mo. Yeah, hey, we can do it as many times as we need. Once it goes on, it's permanent, you know? Oh, fuck yeah. There we go.
Okay, cool.
How you like them apples? I know, you're so comfortable and so soft. And every day I inconvenience you in new and creative ways, but you'll be going here now. It's like over there, but over here. Schmink, god damn it. If I can't have Mo's seat, I don't want to play with you guys.
Gorge.
Hell yeah, gorge.
Gorge.
All right, here we go. The first strike.
All right, ready?
Go for it. Ow, ow, ow.
Going okay so far?
Yeah.
Nice.
Are you done yet?
3 more seconds and almost done.
Never say that to the guy holding the needle to your arm.
A little bit longer. We're just a teensy.
Is that also a Megamind reference?
Yes.
Yo, Megamind reference in this economy. I guess, how did you get into doing historical tattoos?
I've been inspired by ancient art for so much of my life. And growing up in like a household where that was also very valued, you know, I was like exposed to a lot of different artists and different kinds of forms of art. And I mean, I started tattooing when I was 18, just like in my bedroom, you know. I don't always recommend doing it that route, but...
sewing needle and India ink,
you know.
yeah, thumbtack.
I feel like it's a rite of passage for a lot of tattoo
of course.
artists,
I've heard that story a few times.
definitely.
Yeah.
You know, I've since elevated my practice and I'll still do the house call here or there. But yeah, it was kind of, I started integrating a lot more of that into my practice, I think, when I took my first art history class in community college. And I was like really, really fascinated by the cave art and like prehistoric art specifically. It was specifically an ancient art history, like prehistory to
cool.
like the mid 1800s. So,
wow, that's neat. I feel like not a lot of art history classes go over that.
yeah, I have also taken like a, you know, medieval time to modern or like contemporary art history class. Just like all of the classes I've taken, there's so many symbolic motifs that are sort of timeless.
Yeah.
Like you can look at so many of the symbols and things that we've created as human beings like over the course of time, and there's so much like overlap and parallel between so much of it, and I just find that really beautiful. And it's like one of the things I love about ancient art is like this is before a time where people were sharing art with the world because there was no way to share it unless you were like you happen to be another nomadic group that like comes into a cave, right, and sees some other person's art, which is like has happened, you know. There's like some caves that have, you know, thousands of years of art in there, like, or like art that is separated by thousands of years of time.
So you are a stick and poke artist.
Yes.
How does this work? What are you doing to me right now?
I feel like most people think of tattoos as like you walk into a big dude bro shop and you pick a skull from like a wall of skulls and mermaids, and they...
Are you saying that's not what this is right now? This isn't a big dude bro shop?
You know, it's a huge dude bro shop. But like, you know, and then they bring out this big bulky machine and they like drill it, they drill a design into your arm, and you know, you pay them $100 and you get sent out into the world. But I feel like there's very much a movement of DIY artists who are sort of bringing more of a traditional, if not like spiritual practice of tattooing kind of back into fruition that's a lot more in line with like ancient tattoo practices, which I mean, like going back to Otzi, right, is a lot of his tattoos are considered to be like sort of an early form of acupuncture or served some medical purpose. And even in some of the like oldest depictional or like representational tattoos that we find, it seems very connected to that person's life or something important to them. And so it sort of developed into this like more spiritual practice, you know. And you look at cultures like a lot of the Pacific Islander cultures and like the Maori and you know, groups of people like that whose tattoos are actually even more meaningful. You know, it directly correlates with like your role in your community or in your family. And then you know, Thomas Edison created the first like electric engraver that sort of got co-opted by...
that old?
Yeah.
That was Thomas Edison.
Another artist, I forget his name.
Holy shit.
He saw that and was like, that would be sick as a tattoo machine. And instead of a pen, he put a needle in it.
Wow, interesting.
And that was sort of the first like patented tattoo machine. I think it has its own time and place, but I really am interested in a more traditional approach to the practice, and stick and poking like allows me to do that. And I feel like, you know, what people don't really realize is you can get a lot more done with hand poke tattoos than a lot of people give them credit for.
Yeah.
Like I always kind of get the sort of hesitant nod when I tell people I'm a stick and poke artist, and then I show them my work and they're like, oh wow, that looks like it was done with a machine, which is like, you know, almost like a backhanded
a little bit of a backhanded, yeah.
I feel like people have an idea of stick and pokes being these, like, you know, the cheap basement tattoos you get
I got
college
that in
or in high school.
The sewing needle in the Indian
Right?
age, you know,
But it is the traditional means of tattooing. It's how all the sailors did their tattoos. It's how every ancient culture has done tattoos, has been with some analog form of otherwise depositing ink into skin. Sharp stick or sharp rock or sharp needle or sharp bone, and a lot of it, you know, was like soot and charcoal and other natural ingredients. And, you know, that's just how they did it.
The Pazyryk warrior tattoos are some of the most amazing mummy tattoos that I've ever seen. They were created, as the name would suggest, by the Pazyryk culture. They existed from around 600 to 300 BCE during the Iron Age, and they were a nomadic horse people that dominated the lands around the Altai Mountains, around near what is today Russia, China, Kazakhstan, and Mongolia. The Pazyryk culture was a smaller group of the larger Saka nomadic cultures, and in turn bore a close cultural similarity to the much more famous Scythian culture in the western part of the steppe. The Pazyryks, like their surrounding cultural groups, were skilled riders and fierce warriors. Each nomadic group was believed to have consisted of around 30 different families, which would have allowed them to be both highly mobile and very socially tight-knit. There's evidence to suggest that they would herd sheep between winter and summer feeding grounds, and constructed yurts out of wood as seasonal camp dwellings. Their diet consisted of foraged items like nuts and berries, as well as flatbreads made from wheat and barley, as well as cheese and meat from their livestock, and even marijuana. They were out there smoking weed and getting tattoos way before it was cool. Okay, Dad, you remember what it was like to smoke weed and lay on the floor listening to Making Movies on vinyl? But do you remember what it was like to smoke weed and listen to the thundering hoofbeats of a Pazyryk cavalry charge in 600 BCE? I don't think so. Because the Pazyryk people tended to be nomadic, some of the greatest wealths of information that we have about them is their graves. After all, these were some of the only times where they stopped moving. They buried their dead in structures called kurgans. They're like a type of burial mound, and most of them were pretty similar to one another. The mound itself was made out of either soil or stones and was between 5 and 15 feet high and about 80 to 150 feet in diameter. Beneath that, from the ground level, there would be a burial chamber that could be about 20 feet deep. And many of these burial chambers are found lined with logs like a log cabin, with some sites indicating that these log cabins were actually rebuilt inside of the grave and that they may have been actual dwellings somewhere else. It gives us a really great window into the complexity of their temporary structures. The deceased who were buried in these kurgans were often buried in log caskets that had been hollowed out, and the burials themselves are full of unbelievable artifacts, including this. The world's oldest rug. Isn't that cool? Yeah, well, you'll think it's even cooler when you know that it's made with 1.1 million knots. Have you tied 1.1 million knots? I don't think so. A rug surviving for over 2,000 years is pretty amazing, so you won't be surprised that there's all kinds of other things from these graves as well. Furs and leather and tools and exotic items like shells from the coast of India and even handcrafts from China. The reason all this stuff still exists is because the conditions in this part of the world were absolutely perfect for preservation. It's really cold, really dry, and the ground is almost always frozen in permafrost. It's like most of frost. But interestingly, the tombs themselves played a large role in the preservation process. Somehow, the kurgan works to insulate the ground below it so that an ice lens forms. This is pretty much just a dome of permafrost that lasts through the summer directly underneath the tomb. In turn, during the summer, when the sun melts the frost on the ground around it and beats down on the tomb, the ice lens keeps the tomb itself cold like a giant refrigerator. It's super weird. I don't think it was done intentionally at all, but this is the only place in the world where any tombs that function like this have ever been recorded. And it's this unique refrigerator effect that has also preserved the people that were laid to rest inside these tombs. From these, we can see elaborate burial rituals, like how in some burials, the Pazyryk would remove the muscle and organs from the dead and stuff them with straw and aromatic herbs before sewing them back up and burying them. I didn't look into this custom too much because I needed to stay somewhat on track, but my spitball theory for why this is that it has something to do with them being a culture that developed in an area that the ground freezes in the winter. Here in New England, all of the old cemeteries have this big vault outside of them. It looks like a crypt. And I always assumed that it was for some big wealthy family when I was growing up, but actually it was a giant refrigerator. If a person died in the cold months, there's no way that you're going to be able to dig a grave for them, so they would take everyone who died in the winter, shove them in that burial vault, and then deal with it in the spring. So I don't know, I'm just throwing an idea out here. Maybe I'm completely off base with this, but seems like, you know, something that would remove the stuff that would really start to go bad if you couldn't bury a body for a while. But most importantly for this story, these unique preservation conditions also preserved tattoos. In fact, of the 60-ish sites in the world where tattoo mummies have been found, 4 of them are from this culture, and all in this like tiny little valley. And from these 4 sites, archaeologists have found around 10 different mummies with tattoos. This immense concentration and the tattoo's complexity indicate that there was a huge tattoo culture in this area at one time. So to learn more about this, it's time to bring on our second special guest. I'd be willing to bet that if you know a single name in the world of tattoo archaeology, it will be this one. Ladies and gentlemen, the guy who knows a lot more than I do about this, give it up for Aaron Deter-Wolf.
So I'm Aaron Deter-Wolf, so I am a professional archaeologist for the state of Tennessee. I am with the Tennessee Division of Archaeology. We're part of the state's Department of Environment and Conservation. And so my day job, my real job, is helping to manage the 63,000 or so recorded archaeological sites in the state of Tennessee.
Wow.
And you know, that's very different from day to day. You know, we're working with individual collections. We're working with sites on state-owned lands. I've been working more or less full-time for the last 2 years on repatriation work. But then, man, for about 2 decades now, I've been way down this independent research rabbit hole on the archaeology of tattooing. That came out of my research in Native North America and here in the American Southeast. I'm a material culture guy, right? Like I'm really into objects and tools. And it started to bother me that there's this really good historical evidence for Native American tattooing at the time Europeans arrived, but that there was basically no archaeological record of that. You know, millions and millions of pointy objects in the archaeological record, but like 10 of them had been identified as possible tattoo artifacts. Why are we missing this and how can we do better? And, you know, it turns out that's a global problem.
Well, let's chat a little bit about the, you know, kind of Pazyryk tattoos, because, you know, they're sort of the primary thing that we're diving into with this one. I think they're a very unique, example in their density in this part of the world. It's pretty amazing how many examples and instances came out of this one, you know, tiny valley, and how elaborate they are. What is your kind of, just off the cuff, as someone who researches tattoos, can you just give us the very brief download of what is the deal with the Pazyryk tattoos?
Well, so, you know, in the 1940s, Soviet archaeologists excavated a couple of tombs from this one valley, the Pazyryk Valley, you know, in Siberia, and they excavated these tombs that had been frozen in permafrost. So these were tombs that were dug down into the ground. My understanding is they were actually then built to be like buildings out of log.
Yeah,
walls,
there was like log structures underneath.
Furniture and wall hangings and all sorts of stuff. And they had been looted in the past, in antiquity. And that allowed groundwater during freeze-thaw periods to get down into the tombs and freeze them solid. So they're essentially ice mummies, although not encased in ice in the same way that Ötzi was. So at the time in which Rudenko excavated these in the 1940s, there were one or two examples of tattoos that could be seen with the naked eye. But it wasn't until then the early 2000s when scholars at the Hermitage Museum used infrared photography that they discovered that there were more tattoos on those mummies and that all of the individuals in those tombs were tattooed, not just the one person. And so, you know, like this has been an ongoing process. We recently wrote a paper on the woman from Tomb 2 at the Pazyryk site. She was not known to be tattooed at all until the early 2000s.
Wow. It's kind of amazing just again that, you know, 100% of the skin like preserved from this part of the world has these tattoos that are immensely elaborate. So, you know, we see these examples of Scythian animal style, is that what it's called? It has a, yeah. And they're pretty amazing. There's, you know, a mix of these mythical animals. There's a mix of these, real animals that kind of have these fictional embellishments and things like that. But what do you think that can kind of tell us about this culture? Do you think these tattoos have a particular meaning, beyond just complete conjecture?
Well, for starters, I think that it doesn't necessarily tell us anything that we can't gain from their other artwork and material
Completely.
culture, right? So all of the things that show up in these tattoos also appear in their gold work, in their felt work, in their woodwork. So this is a consistent across their culture that these icons appear. It's not like they're completely different or outstanding in the context of being on the body. So broadly then, what does this tell us? Well, it tells us something about perhaps the animals that they're seeing around them. It tells us that there is this consistent focus on hunting motifs, on the exchange, the interaction of predator and prey animals. So that's obviously important to them. It's very tempting to take an image of like a sheep on a man's body from the past and be like, oh, well, this gave him hunting magic.
Yeah.
Did it? Does it?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Again, trying to kind of, project that the ancients were so superstitious and, everything had a meaning. It's like, no, it's a badass tattoo. What do you want me to tell you?
There's some fantastical animals. There are those sort of, the wild griffin deer and those straight up griffins, and then the horses that have the beaks and the bird heads on their antlers. But there's also, very literal, like, oh, that's a fish. Like also very literal animals. So, I think we can extrapolate that some of this relates to belief system and, how they saw the spiritual as well as the physical world, but not entirely. You can't draw that clear line across it.
Completely. Do we have a good idea of the toolkit that would have been used for the Pazyryk tattoos?
No, we're working on that.
Yeah.
So, so this was one of those big voids where, for what, 60, 70 years now, we've known that this culture practiced tattooing. But the tools and methods that they use to do it have been basically unknown. There had been a pattern at a couple of sites where these long gold needles had been found.
Wow.
Like 10, 12 centimeters, I think, long, and some of which have eyed ends to them.
Damn.
The problem is that those were not from Scythian sites; those were from Sarmatian sites. So, an adjacent culture, but not the actual culture that's doing the tattooing.
Yeah.
So it had been suggested that the tattoos may have been stitched in using those gold needles.
Wow.
That's a technique used by the Inuit right up in the Arctic Circle, is this subdermal, where you take the threaded needle and pass it through beneath the skin.
Wow.
And it pulls pigment then horizontally through the skin. It's amazing.
That's crazy. Wow, I'd never heard of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's also zero cultural evidence of it happening in this region. So when we map these things out at the global scale, like that happens in the far north and the far south in the tip of South America, but it doesn't really happen anywhere else. And what we did in this recent study is we were able to use these really high resolution images, new digital images of this woman from Tomb 2, and to look very closely, microscopically at her tattoos and how they've preserved. And so then working with tattoo artists, with Danny Ridday, my buddy Danny, who's a tattooer in France, we've been doing this more and more, looking at the physical traits, the forensic traits of preserved tattoos, and connecting those forensic traits to how they were made.
Wow. That's amazing. I guess sort of related question to that, are you able to tell what pigments were used to actually create the tattoos on these ancient mummies?
Yeah, that's a really good question. No. So, the preserved tattoos are, I think at this point, almost uniformly black work. There are one or two deliberately mummified skins from the historical era in Southeast Asia that have red.
Wow.
But in the pre-modern context, everything we found documented has been black. We are assuming that those are carbon-based.
Yeah.
Either charcoal or soot. Although there are, in the global sample, there are ethnographic accounts of people also using like hematite or magnetite as the base for black ink. But, it's going to be something that's non-organic and is black.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things we've been struggling with, is trying to figure out what these preserved pigments are. And we can get in very good settings, if we're very lucky, we can get elemental readings. We can get, for example, carbon or iron, but we can't tell what contributes to that carbon or iron, right? So that carbon could be a burned plant, it could be a burned log, it could be soot from around a fireplace. Iron could be magnetite, it could be hematite, it could be ochre, it could be something else. So we can't yet get into what the actual makeup of the pigments was.
Wow. That's amazing. Did I not tell you that Aaron knows what he's talking about? I don't think I hammered that home quite enough. Now, Aaron's going to come back in a minute because we need to talk a little bit more about the world of tattooed mummies. But for now, speaking of tattoos, why don't we have a check on how the tattoo is coming along?
It's cool because, we found mummies that are as old as Otzi, which are 5,300 years old. And so that, at least tells us that tattooing is at least that old, but there is, evidence and speculation that it could go back as far as like 8,000 years.
Wow, that's crazy.
As a practice.
Damn.
That was, probably started as like a medical practice. There's a lot of cultures even still that view charcoal as, like a healing, like a healing element. And so it's not far off that, for like in my mind, in my like imagination, because I don't know how much weight this actually holds in reality, but it's like, maybe even more so than the puncturing aspect of it, as like an acupuncture sense, the puncturing was just a byproduct of putting the charcoal into the skin to like draw out impurities or anything like that.
Theoretically, it wasn't as much about the design and the final pattern you're making, it's more about putting charcoal in.
Exactly.
That was kind of always my thought with the Otzi tattoo, and I'm sure there's more research on this now, but that it was, people always ask like, oh, well, why are there so many lines in certain places and fewer lines in others? And my theory there is that he had arthritis. He's the oldest recorded case of Lyme disease, and all of these lines show up on these joints. And so maybe in a place like the back of the left knee, I think where there's like 7 lines or something like that, that may be not from like sitting down and getting all 7 at once. It's like those were 7 times that the treatment, air quote, was needed there.
I actually think that was one of the papers they most recently released on Otzi.
Really? Wow, look at me. I'm ahead of the curve.
Yeah, where they were kind of talking about that, and talking about how like they were probably like it was very likely that they were done over the course of time and possibly even by different practitioners.
Wow, that's interesting.
However, with a lack of like an artistic style, it's really hard to tell.
It's just a line.
Right.
Yeah.
But there are examples like what we're doing here with the Scythian culture and the Pazyryk culture, right? Like one of the most recent mummies they found, I think, was a woman that had these like really beautiful kind of griffin and reindeer motifs on her. But
yeah, I think I saw that. That came out pretty recently.
Yeah.
I remember seeing that, yeah.
But it's really interesting because there's a very big distinction in style and skill between 2 of her tattoos.
Wow.
And so it's very likely that it could have been done by the same person at very different points in time of their career, or it could have been done by like a master and an apprentice.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
Because like one of the figures, clearly like the older tattoo, right? It's a lot less anatomically accurate. The lines don't have as much integrity. And then the second one is very clean, very precise, very like symmetrical, and obviously their style integrates a lot of like weird poses with their animals, but it felt more anatomically like fluid, as opposed to the first one where it was like the legs were all different sizes and all of them wiggly and the lines weren't exactly perfect. And again, I think it's just like, it's really fascinating to think that like, even today, in today's DIY tattoo culture, everybody starts somewhere, and it's cool to see, sort of the beginning of somebody's work, or speculating that it's like the beginning of their work, and then seeing how they progress in their practice over time, and how that style evolves.
I always like things like that where it's sort of some things like that sort of demystify ancient people a little bit.
Yeah.
Because I think we kind of have this romanticized view of ancient people that they were just somehow like, they were like the perfect artists who just knew exactly what they were doing and all that. But little things like that remind you that like they're just as human as we are now. Where like in order for them to get as skilled as the artists that did, these tattoos back in the day, they had to practice a lot.
Yeah.
There was going to be some shitty tattoos that they did at some point,
Exactly.
Yeah, you don't just suddenly become that good by virtue of being an ancient person,
I just like, I don't know, I really hope that there was like a genuine culture around this, because I imagine in these ancient places there was like a place you go where like there is this artisan who, maybe this was like a coveted skill where like even today, people beg their favorite artist for an apprenticeship because they're so desperate to learn, because they're so fascinated and enamored by this art, this like it has such a permanence that no other art has. Save for, actually, funny enough, the other day when we were at Common Ground, the engraver, Lady Sigrid, she was talking about how our arts are kind of very similar and they're both very permanent. Like mine stays on skin forever and then hers sits on the headstone forever.
Yeah, your
she's
final
engraving.
tattoo,
Right.
Yeah, sitting in a graveyard. And that's the other interesting thing is we have such a small sample size of the, what ancient tattoos were actually like. Because it's just something that's so hard to preserve that unless you have the perfect conditions for a mummy to form, like it could have been more ancient people than not had tattoos, and we just never know because they're just bones.
Well, I mean, that's like very likely the case too. I mean, like a lot of, it's confirmed that like Egyptian culture was big on, like ancient Egyptian culture was big on tattoos. And, some of the few that we found were like people with relatively small tattoos, but they were still representational of pieces in their life. Yeah. Right? So it's very likely to me that there have to be more affluent people who could afford like to cover their body in things like that, And it's something that I guess like we at least we don't know yet, let alone if we'll ever know, because it's such an ephemeral art in that way where like, it is permanent in our lifetime, but other than those few cases, your tattoos die with you. It's like your body will eventually decompose. I mean, I guess if you're embalmed, right, you're just gonna sit in a metal box or a concrete box for the rest of your life. Yeah. Or for the rest of time.
For the rest of time. It starts at the end of your life. Yeah. Okay, I realize now that I didn't actually explain what it is that I'm getting tattooed on me. So let me go over that real quick. Like I said, the Pazyryk warrior tattoos are known from about 4 different archaeological sites with about 10 different individuals. The most famous of these is known as the Ice Princess. She was found in a completely intact and untouched tomb, literally like frozen in a block of ice in her sarcophagus. Studies revealed that her nasal passages had residue of mercury and copper, indicating that she may have been partaking in some kind of ritual, or, went down to the paint section at the Ace Hardware. She also had a giant hat, which was really cool. I wish I had a hat like that. These elements of her burial, along with her being buried kind of far away from many others, indicates that she may have been a priestess or a shaman or something like that. She was also found buried with 6 horses that had been ritualistically sacrificed and buried along with her, which is hard. The Ice Princess was also unusually tall and thin for a woman of this time period in this part of the world. She would have stood at around 5 foot 4 inches and weighed a little under 110 pounds when she was alive. Considering that many of the other Pazyryk mummies are really well built, this was a bit of an outlier, and so archaeologists wondered if there was something wrong with her health. Sure enough, when her body was CAT scanned, the imagery showed dark nodes all around her body, including swollen lymph nodes, indicating that she met her untimely end to a vicious cancer. I do wonder whether or not she just had a predisposition for it, or whether this was something that was induced by her environment. If she had begun whatever ritualistic activities she was engaging in from a young age, I would imagine that a lifetime of inhaling copper and mercury would almost undoubtedly cause cancer at some point. I was unable to find any sort of research on this, and don't really know if we have a way of knowing at all, but makes me think, Anyway, she also has one of the most famous of the Pazyryk tattoos, a tattoo of a deer on her shoulder. You've probably seen it before. Now, the ones that I'm working on getting come from a different burial, one called Barrow 2. Excavated in 1947, this site had an elaborate grave with a huge dude in it. He was a big burly guy who stood at about 5'6", which was pretty large for this culture, and he was absolutely covered in tattoos, both of his arms, one of his legs, and up and down his back. They include things like rams and deer and fish and fictional animals that cover one of his arms. He also seemingly met a pretty terrible end in the form of an axe to the head. Ugh, pouring one out for that guy. As if that wasn't enough, it also appeared that he was scalped shortly after his death. Though it's not currently known whether this was some sort of dishonor done by his enemy, or whether it was some part of a burial custom. Either way, this individual was dubbed the Barrow 2 Chief, and is in my opinion the single most spectacular example of the Pazyryk culture's tattoos. So anyway, that is the one that I am currently working on getting. Now, one of the things that I thought about when going into this is it weird to get a dead guy's tattoos? This is one of those archaeological ethics conversations that I'm sure most people will probably have varying answers towards. And it's important in the world of archaeology to remain sensitive that you're dealing with real cultures. It's my sort of calculus that the age of these tattoos, combined with trying to do it in a reverent and educational way that is honoring the deceased, makes it, more acceptable than if I were to get a tattoo of a white woman in a headdress on my chest. That one guy from season 5 of Love Island. I'm looking at you, dude. You know who you are. You are funny, you are hot, and then every time you get out there and take your shirt off, it'd be like, oh, what is wrong with you? It's also worth noting that engaging in any sort of cultural practice is something that should be weighed on a case-by-case basis. And that the most important rule when engaging with things like this is to approach it in good faith, learn about it in good faith, and listen to the wishes of the communities should they still exist, or the descendant communities if they don't. I know that this video is mostly about the Pazyryk mummies, but I couldn't get Aaron on here and not just grill him about a bunch of other tattooed mummies from around the world. So let's bring Aaron back in and we're gonna dive a little deeper into this strange phenomenon. What are some of the methods that you can use to determine what the intent may have been behind ancient tattoos that you discover?
Yeah, that's really tough, man. That is, wild supposition and lies.
Totally.
Right?
You can never truly know. Like, you can't ask them for sure. So it's always going to be a pretty big
right. There's always going to be that disconnect.
Yeah.
So in some cases, you feel like there are clues there, right? So, like, for example, Ann Austin, who has recently published a whole series of tattoos from a site in Egypt. She very famously a couple of years ago found the body of an older woman who had tattoos on her throat.
Wow.
And those tattoos were, the Wajid eye, so the Eye of Hathor, and 2 baboons, which are also associated with Hathor, and then this series of symbols, 2 Wajid eyes, and some symbols in between that Anne says can actually be read. Whoa. And that there actually can be read. It can be interpreted as a votive inscription for, to speak good or to speak well. And so finding, these what you can identify as sacred symbols with this sort of votive inscription on someone's voice box, it's then sort of, you feel like you're within striking distance of being able to say, well, this person was important within this belief system, particularly associated with this goddess, and was doing things that were, related to that. On the other hand, then you have the Scythian tattoos. These warriors buried in the permafrost with these just badass, full sleeves and leg tattoos. And you look at them and you're like, yeah, those are cool.
Yeah. Badass.
Right, badass. What do they mean? I don't know, right? It means he really liked deer. I don't know. It's easy for us to sort of cherry pick from the historical record and be like, oh, he was a warrior. So his tattoos mean he was gifted on the field of battle. Yeah.
It's kind of that, like, romanticized, almost the noble savage thing that a little bit of the, hands down from those, the aristocrats excavating in France or whatever you said, of like, oh, yes, he had he had a tattoo of, like, a lion. He must have been, like, the fiercest warrior, But it's like, I don't know, maybe he thought lions were cool. We think lions are cool. Like, I know a lot of guys with really cool tattoos, and I don't think that they'd be great in fighting, Like...
And I think our guy Utsi is a really good example of this, right? So, Utsi the Iceman, he's the oldest example of preserved tattoos, about 5,300 years old. And his tattoos aren't artistic in a way that we understand them. They're a series of parallel and crossed lines on his body. And so one of the going interpretations for Utsi has always been that his tattoos were not decorative, that they were instead therapeutic or medicinal. They put on his body to treat things. But, I submit to you that just because we don't understand something doesn't mean that it wasn't significant to people in the past. And so, we can't read the iconography of his tattoos, but that doesn't mean that they had no iconography, that they had no symbolism baked into them.
I can only imagine that as many different places as tattoos have arisen, there has been equally as many different methods. Could you tell us a little bit about some toolkits from around the world that are kind of unique, ancient solutions to giving a tattoo?
Yeah, so that's so my buddy Ben Robitaille has really been helming this research, and man, for over 2 decades now, Ben has been collecting this database of historical accounts describing pre-electric tattooing tools and techniques, and then also building this database of examples that are curated in museum and private collections. And so at this point, I think that database has like over 1,000 descriptions and then like 1,500 actual examples of tools. And, it's changing every day. Like we're constantly finding new information, particularly from traditional practitioners and indigenous folks. This is stuff that's not published and is being shared with us directly. So there is no static map, right? It's a moving target. But, you can basically divide the thing into, direct puncture. So pointing, point first into the skin. That can be hafted. It can be something that's held in the hand, like a tattoo or like a cactus needle. And in our classification, that also includes the hafted tools from the Pacific, which are, things like this, right? That are hafted to the handle and then tapped into the skin.
Wow.
The unifying thing here is that it's going directly into the skin. And then the two other categories are subdermal. So that's the stitching we talked about, where the pigment is being pulled horizontally through the skin. And then the last one is incision. So where the skin is being sliced and then pigment's being rubbed in. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's how I always heard the Otzi tattoos were done.
Yeah.
Still this running theory.
No, so we disproved that,
Really?
So Danny and Maya Seeluk, Jakobsen and I, this has been like 2 or 3 years ago, we did a project for XARC, which is an experimental archaeology group out of Europe. And we recreated all these traditional tattooing tools, and then Danny used them to tattoo his leg.
Wow.
And so over this like 12-hour period, he tattooed his leg with 8 different tools and 8 different techniques. And then we compared the skin as it healed to see if there were differences between them. And we were able to determine, and this is not rocket science, right? Like you go to a tattooer and you're like, hey buddy, different tools make different tattoos, and they're like, yeah, screw you, hippie, like, absolutely, right? I use one needle group for lining and one different one for shading, and you use different tools to get different effects. But what we were able to do is document this scientifically in a replicable fashion using Danny's skin. And so because we documented the way they healed, that's our database to compare to preserved tattoos. And so, yeah, the first thing we looked at was Otzi, because ever since he came out of the ground, people have been like, oh, his tattoos were cut into the skin. There's zero evidence for that. There's been zero positive evidence ever presented for that. That starts like the day he comes out of the ice. People are like, his tattoos are incised. Why? We don't know. We're just saying it.
It's a line. That's how I do it.
It's right. It's just fine. That's what it is. And so that's just been repeated and repeated. And with our data then, I think 2 years ago, we published that paper where we could actually show, Danny's preserved incised tattoos do not look anything like Otzi's tattoos.
Wow.
There's a really clear forensic difference between stab wounds and cut wounds. And that same thing happens with tattooing, just at the microscopic level.
Wow.
So things that are sliced into the skin look different than things that are punctured into the skin. And his tattoos are punctured. So his tattoos are 100% hand poke, probably with a single point tool rather than a group of needles.
Yeah.
And that's probably either then a copper awl or a bone point of some kind.
Well, that even lends a little bit more to the other kind of piece of that story that a lot of people talk about, is it being like, kind of a form of acupuncture, which, I'm sure that's also debatable. But I mean, again, if it's at these, joints and things like that, he's the oldest recorded human case of Lyme disease as well, right? So he has, arthritis. And so there's potentially a parallel between those being in a lot of, lower back of the knees, ankles, legs, things like that. But, I feel like it'd be a little more therapeutic to, have the poking sensation than just a guy, cutting your flesh open and rubbing charcoal in.
Yeah, well, and in that same paper, we actually broke down that claim a little bit. And so we mapped out all the locations of tattoos on his bodies and all the locations of his known injuries and ailments. And it turns out that less than half of his tattoos line up with known injuries or ailments.
Wow, interesting.
And so, that doesn't say that he wasn't suffering from things that don't preserve skeletally, right? But it makes it seem like that's maybe not a one-to-one correlation. The guys who study him, Marco Samadelli and some others, they have in the past started talking about it not necessarily as acupuncture, but as care, as that most of these tattoos, many of these tattoos are in places he couldn't reach himself. So regardless of why they were put onto his body, they are evidence of him receiving care in his community from others.
Wow.
And so I think that's maybe a better way to sort of wrap our heads around it than to be like ancient acupuncture.
Yeah.
You know?
That's beautiful. I like that. That's a profound way of putting it. It is an example of ancient care, you know?
Yeah.
Is there any sort of
to that end too, my buddy Luke Renaud has pointed out, he's like, there are so many acupuncture meridians on the human body. He's like, literally every single person who has ever been tattooed has been tattooed on their acupuncture meridian.
It's impossible to miss, you know?
Right, right. You have to really work.
Significant if the tattoos were not in acupuncture meridians.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, as we kind of tie it up here, I guess I want to go a little bit broad. I was fascinated looking over that database and kind of just clicking around at some of the different examples, and there are far too many to talk about in any sort of, short, punctual video. But I wanted to ask, do you have any particular, instances or discoveries in this side of things that you think are just really interesting from just a personal side?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, absolutely the Peruvian materials.
Yeah.
So, collectively, the world has known about ancient Peruvian tattooing for a couple of centuries now, but it really has only been treated in fits and starts and groups of less than 20 or so individuals over the last couple decades. And so the work that we have been doing, actually documenting those tattoos digitally and using infrared, has revealed this entire tradition that I think is basically unknown up until now. And it's this amazingly intricate black work tradition. I mean, these are artists, they are working with these intersections of positive and negative space where, the areas that are untattooed are making shapes that match with the areas that are tattooed. There's a lot of like reflection, shapes are reflected, and it's just, and there's examples of, we have people that are tattooed fully from, shoulder to fingertips, literally from shoulder to fingertips, with these patterns and designs and animals. And it's just a truly amazing tradition to me. And we've learned, for example, that at least in our data set, about 70% of these tattoos are incised. And, there are big black work traditions of incision tattooing among the Ainu, for example, in a Japanese archipelago, but this is the first one of this extent that has been documented in the modern era. And I don't know, it's every time I look at these things, I have to sit with it a little bit and just
wow.
This is really cool. And they feel so modern is the other thing. Some of them feel so modern, the way they use these big blocks of solid black. And anyway, yeah, it's incredible.
That's amazing.
Stuff.
Do you see any sort of pattern with those of are these on people of sort of well-to-do? Are these a priest class? Are these a ruling class? What, where are you seeing such elaborate designs?
We're trying to figure that out. So because of the particular archaeological history of this region, most of these materials are not from context. Most of them are things that were collected for exhibition, or things that were accidentally encountered and then just taken and put in museums.
Gotcha.
And so there's really just been one study by Peter Van Dalen Luna and colleagues of a site where they actually excavated a Chancay cemetery as a salvage project. And within that cemetery of, I think, over 100 people, a portion of them were tattooed, but not all of them. And they identified, so both men and women were tattooed in their sample, and all of the tattooed individuals were in a certain area of the cemetery. But within that area, they didn't have better or more rich material culture than other people in the cemetery.
Wow.
So it's, it seems to cut across classes, it cuts across genders, but it seems to be a unifying cultural factor of some sort within that cemetery.
Wow, that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
That is so interesting. I wonder what that could be about. That is crazy. Just have their own section, but nothing really all that different other than their little plot.
Right, and I think the going sort of idea is that these might then be there seems to be a strong overlap with people who are fishing and people who are weaving within that section of the cemetery, based on their funerary accompaniments. But perhaps these are spirit workers, right? What do we do when we don't understand something archeologically? Ritual.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Right.
Ceremonial purposes.
Right. Ritual purposes.
Yep.
But so maybe these are spirit workers. But maybe not. Maybe they are not connected with those sorts of things. We don't know. We don't know at what age they got these tattoos. We don't know why they got these tattoos. We're going to spend decades figuring this out.
Wow.
None of our entire research group is this sort of, loose conglomerate of, archaeologists and museum professionals and tattooers and independent researchers. None of us are affiliated with universities. We are not eligible for grants. We are not eligible for travel funds. This is entirely done. I mean, this is like bandit archaeology.
Awesome.
We're entirely doing this out of pocket.
Citizen science.
Yes, yeah, right. It's pirate science. We're doing it entirely out of pocket because we want to be doing it. None of us, this doesn't get us tenure. It doesn't get us raises. There's none of that. It's just we all have the same ADHD and it focuses around ancient tattooing.
Yeah, I know what it's like. Wow. I can't even pull the big academia card on you. That's
right, yeah.
Damn. Here I was thinking you were just another part of the machine.
Just another academic, yeah.
Well, Aaron, you are at the forefront of it, man. I really appreciate all your work and for lending some of your time and expertise here today. This is really just a wealth of knowledge. I'm over the moon to get to chat with you here. I guess the last question I always try and do whenever I have someone, in person or virtually here is I always ask, is there something that you believe is important to kind of share with a broad audience? Something personal, something you're interested in, something greater, take a chance.
Yeah, so sort of, I like to quote my buddy Matt Loder, who has coined this phrase. He says, tattooing is a medium, not a phenomenon. And I think that is the key takeaway, right? We live in this era in which tattooing is done and treated a certain way, but from the global historical perspective, we are just at like the tip of the pin compared to this massive history. This is a practice of thousands of cultures over thousands of years. And for most of those cultures, it was really critically important to how they understood themselves, envisioned themselves, formed their communities. It was as important after death as it was during life. And I think that's like the big takeaway from this is that, tattooing is not savage, it's not primitive, it's not other, it's not weird. It is the modern incarnation of this global historical practice.
Wow. Beautifully put.
Aaron, thank you very much for joining me. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise with myself and my audience. You are a wealth of knowledge. If you guys are interested in the work that Aaron's doing, make sure to give him a follow over on Instagram at Archaeology Inc. He posts all kind of cool stuff over there. All right, now finally, let's check back in with Mo and see how the tattoo came out.
Wow, look at that, dude. Look at that. Look at that.
Well done, Mo. I can't believe we thought we were going to get through that entire thing in one day. We did not. Well, lucky for you, Mo, we have a tattoo date on like Saturday, so get excited. If you like this work as much as I do, go give Mo a follow over on Instagram at Fossil Evidence. I don't know how you got that username. That's crazy. Really, Fossil Evidence. Did you have to like kill someone for that? Anyway, go check him out, give him some love, and who knows, maybe some of you someday will have work done by the same artist that I have. Wow, well this has been a blast. If you enjoyed this video but aren't done washing your dishes or just aren't quite ready to go to sleep yet, I have plenty more like it, so why let the binge stop here? I bet you'd also get a kick out of my video on the Great Circle Earthworks or my video on the Great Raft. And if you did enjoy this video, I'd greatly appreciate if you could leave an interaction on it. Likes, comments, and subscriptions help boost the video in the algorithm, which allows educational content like this to be able to compete with all of the bullshit. It's your way of helping us continue to create free educational and entertaining content right here on YouTube, and it doesn't cost you a cent. So do a little like, do a little comment, get down tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm dropping shit on the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all very much for watching. If you're interested in seeing me perform live on tour, there are still some tickets left. Link to that is in the description of this video. And also check out some of the merch. Each location has its own shirt. We will not be stocking them on location because there are already enough shirts in the world. We don't need to overstock. So if you want to show up and rep the colors, link to that is below. And if you just want to get a cool shirt from the tour, even if you don't plan on coming, you can do that as well. They're down there. I would like to give a huge video to both Mo and Aaron for helping me out with this video, as well as a massive thank you to my amazing editorial team. I'm the guy that you see in front of the camera doing all this, but these videos would be absolutely nothing like what you see without the amazing people who helped make this happen, so please give them a big round of applause as well. Thank you guys, couldn't do it without you. Lastly, I would like to give a big thank you to all of my patrons over on Patreon. Patrons get early ad-free access to all of my videos, and all of your names will be in the credits of this video as a small token of my appreciation. If you're interested in becoming a patron, the link to that is in the description of this video. Ladies and gentlemen, remember to stay curious, stay inquisitive, and most importantly, That looks infected. I wish you could play Here Come the Mummies for the outro, but we can't, so we're playing this instead. They have some crazy shit. Go check them out. Go give my boys at Here Come the Mummies some love. They're like a band that they are always dressed as mummies. And I don't know if their identities are known. They make an effort to not. It's like a Daft Punk kind of situation, or a Ghost kind of situation. But they make some bangers and some really weird music too that you listen to and you're like, wow, this is great. And then you listen to the lyrics and you go, huh? Huh? Like that clip of House. My girlfriend's been watching a lot of House recently, and I can't watch it. It freaks me the fuck out. It's just like, oh, look, another person being exposed to a new host of horrific maladies. But you know what? I support her anyway. Honey, I love you. And you can watch whatever weird TV show you want, and I will support you wholeheartedly. All right? If that ain't love, I don't know what is. Pazyryk. 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 That's it. Pazyryk. Pazyryk. You know that's permanent, right? Shut up, Mom. I'm smoking weed with the Pazyryks.